Father, the kings of the earth can take the authority that you have given them and either use it for good or for evil. Antiochus IV, that we'll study today, was ambitious. He was always seeking his own glory with no concern for others or for your glory. He's remembered for all the death and the devastation that he brought to people around him. Your son, the King of Kings, is the ideal shepherd. He uses his infinite power and wisdom and control and love to bless those who draw near to him. Your Spirit in each believer enables us to become more like our King. And instead of death and terrible loss, he gives us abundant, eternal life with joy. I pray in his name. Amen. Well, I wanted to mention the extra handout this morning, and we'll just glance at it and then put it away for reference. But this is a family tree that shows you the characters that we've been studying in Daniel chapter 11. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the line of the kings in Egypt, and the right-hand side shows you the kings in Syria. And the one that we're talking about today is this bottom of the right-hand side, Antiochus IV. But we've been looking at all the others as you go through chapter 11. This is just in the first 35 verses of chapter 11. And you see how they intermarry, so there are connections between those two lines as you go through that list. So that's just something you can take away for reference. It's just a way to understand how all these people fit together, so many keys that we've talked about. Now, last week, Egypt had asked Rome for some help due to these Syrian attacks. And meanwhile, the Syrian army was being weakened, and that was as a result of the spy. That was the king's daughter who was spying and giving bad information to the king of Syria. So Antiochus was curious about this, Antiochus III, and Rome was preventing him from conquering seaports all around the Mediterranean. So after he died, his son, Antiochus IV, seizes the throne, and today we turn to him in Daniel 11, verse 22, talking about the rise of this king Antiochus IV, who gave himself the name Epiphanes, which means glorious or God manifest. Verse 22, the armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully. He shall become strong with a small people. So Antiochus destroyed a large army, and this was on their home court down in Egypt at Pelusium. And he captures the Egyptian king, Ptolemy, who was the son of his sister. So this is one of his nephews, the son of Cleopatra. The Prince of the Covenant here refers to the murder of the high priest. His name was Onias III, and that was in 172 BC. So Antiochus appoints his pawn named Jason, a brother of Onias, and sets him up as the high priest. Jason is like some of the liberal ministers that we have even still today that go around persuading their flock to abandon what God has shown them. In this case, persuading Jews to abandon their faith. And Jason also wanted to establish the Greek culture in Israel. He wanted to eliminate all the traditional Jewish beliefs and their way of worship and put the Greek philosophy in its place. So in verse 23, this is where Antiochus makes some alliances with other nations, and especially with Egypt. And there's this competition for control. Who is going to be the ruler over Egypt? And it's between two of the nephews of Antiochus. And we saw last week that Antiochus murdered one of his other nephews, Demetrius. So it's kind of a dangerous situation to be one of his nephews. But these two nephews are fighting to be the king of Egypt. And after Philometor was captured, back in verse 22, this is where the brother Ptolemy Euergetes becomes king over Egypt. So again, these brothers are sons of Cleopatra. They're nephews of Antiochus IV, the invader. And Antiochus saw this as an opportunity. So while there's this power struggle going on, and while Egypt has this weak leadership, he thinks that he can slip in and divide and conquer and become king of Egypt himself. He wants to take over. So he makes a deal with Philometor to join forces against Euergetes, and he's trying to pit brother against brother, staging a fight between these nephews. And what he's hoping is that the two nephews will devour each other or weaken each other, and then he's going to take advantage of that situation to step into leadership. And that brings us to verse 24, where we see Antiochus IV growing in power. Verse 24, without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province. He shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers had done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. And he shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an increasingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for the plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So this covenant that Antiochus made with Philometor, it was kind of a false sense of security for the Egyptians. They felt like that now everything's going to be okay. We can be at ease when we feel secure. And they didn't realize that he was a lying thief. He's just deceiving them, and they're moving into a trap without recognizing it. And what Antiochus planned to do was to capture 4 of their key cities, and he was successful in 3 of those. The only one he did not capture was Alexandria, where they had the great library in Egypt. He was attacking by surprise. He did it during a time of peace when they were not expecting to be attacked. But what was different from the forefathers, from the previous kings in Syria, is that all of the spoils and the riches that he captured, he didn't keep that money for himself. He's kind of like an evil version of Robin Hood, where he takes whatever he captures and he divides it up amongst the gang members. He pretends that he's fairly distributing all of this wealth to the people who supported him. And he's using that stolen treasure to buy their loyalty. It's like a bribe. He's trying to buy their cooperation, that they'll continue to stay in his gang and help him. So Antiochus attacks the new king, and this is Philometor's brother, who was called Physcon or Euergetes. Physcon's most trusted leaders betrayed him. They all turned on him at that point, and his army was massacred. They were just left exposed without leaders. And the Egyptian troops would either desert or defect away. They would turn to the other side. And the treason is what caused the defeat of Egypt. So this was all according to Antiochus' plan. He wanted them to stumble this way. Most of the members there in the inner court had a relationship to both of those kings, to Physcon and to Philometor. And you can see some of that on that first chart that I handed out, the way the relationships intertwined, the intermarriage between the Syrians and the Egyptians. But the allegiance was torn here. There was a division where some people were siding with the king who was in power and still reigning, and then some other people who were siding with the king who had been captured. And they didn't know who to pull for because they had family ties or they cared about both. So the ones who defected thought Antiochus is going to put Philometor back on the throne, and so they gambled that way. They bet that Philometor would be the next king restored to the throne. In verse 27, we're going to see more the wickedness of this Antiochus IV, and we've seen a lot of wickedness already, but it just continues to get worse as you go along in the story. So verse 27, as for the 2 kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. So turning now to the back of the handout, this is top of page 100. These kings of Syria and Egypt were lying to each other. They really, regarding the peace treaty, they had no intent of fulfilling their commitments. They didn't plan to honor the agreement. They were all thinking about revenge and how can I slip in and trick the other person so that I can get even for what's been done. As Antiochus was on his way home through Israel, he begins to covet the wealth there at the temple in Jerusalem. And there was a rumor going around Israel at that time that Antiochus had been killed in the battle. So all the Jews were celebrating that the wicked witch is dead. And then they're just wanting to take back control of their city and their country. So some of the Jews revolted, and they had actually driven the Syrian army out of Jerusalem. Antiochus heard about this, and he decided that he's going to make the Jews pay for what they did to his army. So Antiochus comes in, he violates God's covenant, and that covenant went all the way back almost 2,000 years before that time when God made the covenant with Abraham and then reaffirmed that to Isaac and to Jacob, that the land belonged to Israel. Antiochus comes along and says, no, the land belongs to me. I don't care what God says. So he plundered the city of Jerusalem, plundered the temple, stole treasures. He killed 40,000 of the Jews at that point, and he sent 40,000 more into slavery and sold them to replace some of what he had lost in the war. And that brings us to verse 29, where Antiochus is going to face opposition now from the Roman army, and he persecutes the Jews even further as a result of that. Verse 29, at the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. The ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back, and be enraged, and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. Whenever we see the appointed time in Scripture, it refers to God's timing, the moment in history that God has chosen. There's an example of that we see in Galatians 4, verse 4, referring to the birth of Jesus, the first Christmas. And he talks about when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his Son. So it happened according to God's timing. That the Jews had been praying and hoping for the Messiah to come for many hundreds of years. But in God's timing, it happened in Bethlehem at exactly the right time. So Antiochus is determined here that he's going to conquer Egypt. He invades them again, 168 BC. And his two nephews, this Philometor and Physcon, that had been set as rivals earlier, now they've resolved their differences. Now they've agreed to make amends and share the rule together as co-regents. So they've joined forces, and they're going to both oppose Antiochus when he comes, and they requested help from Rome. So this time Rome sends their navy. In 168 BC, you had this Roman consul named Gaius Popilius Laenas, and he's the one who stopped Antiochus from conquering Egypt. Gaius demanded that he would leave Egypt immediately, or else he's going to face an attack from Rome. And so Antiochus asked for more time. And this is one of those things that I hope that there's a YouTube video we can watch in heaven, because it's one of the most dramatic scenes that you find in history. Gaius pulls out his sword and he draws a circle in the sand around the feet of Antiochus. And he says, don't step out of this circle until you declare your intention. You tell me what you're going to do. Either you're going to leave Egypt now, or you're going to carry your body out, one way or the other. And so the showdown, the gauntlet has been thrown here, and now Antiochus is humiliated. He's angry, he's frustrated, but he doesn't want war with Rome, and so he has no choice. He backs down, and he immediately withdraws those Syrian troops from Egypt, and he concedes to Rome. He yields to their power. His father, Antiochus III, had opened the door for this, the way that he had dealt with Rome. But now the Greek Empire of Alexander bows to Rome in that moment. And even though the Roman Empire has not officially gained power at this point. It's within a century that they will completely take over and conquer the Greek Empire. The western coastlands, and it depends on the translation that you're using here. I read from ESV where it talks about in verse 30 the ships of Kittim, but some translations talk about western coastlands. Other translations like NIV talks about the ship coming from the west, but this is referring to the island of Cyprus, and it's an old place. It's been populated. People lived there for centuries before Daniel. It's mentioned in Isaiah over 100 years before Daniel. It's mentioned in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And then when you get to the New Testament, Barnabas, the encourager, was from Cyprus. He was a native of there. So Rome had built a naval base on this island, and that's where their ships sailed, and the ships from Rome came in from the west. So the last section today is talking about the wrath, where Antiochus Epiphanes is so angry that he needs to vent somewhere, and he sets up the abomination of desolation in Jerusalem. Antiochus had brought his whole army all the way from Syria down to Egypt for nothing, had nothing to show for it. They didn't conquer anything, so they just had to turn around and march back home in defeat. And he's venting his wrath on the Jews, and he murdered tens of thousands more Jews, this time in 168. Some of that history is recorded in the book of 1 Maccabees chapter 1, 2 Maccabees chapter 5. So when Antiochus gets to Jerusalem, he outlaws their Jewish religion, and he replaces it with the Greek idol worship. And there were some Jews who were not sincere in their faith. They were not devoted or committed to serving God. So he rewards them, the ones who obeyed him and the ones who rejected God. And it was really a time of severe testing for all of the Jews, because when he comes in and takes away their worship, wants them to bow down to false idols, it's a choice that they either obey God and lose their life, or they save their life, but then they're not being true to God. And some of the Jews did side with Antiochus, but others, the Maccabees, fought back against him, and they trusted God. So these books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees are named for that group of people that defended the Jewish homeland and defended God against Antiochus at that time. So Antiochus stops the daily sacrifice. He orders that the Jews stop worshiping God, and he posts guards at the temple. So when the Sabbath came, the congregation gathered for worship, and Antiochus ordered the troops to kill all the people who had come to worship at the temple and to destroy the scrolls, the Holy Scriptures. So next week, we're going to see how this wrath that he poured out on the Jews is foreshadowing this Antichrist that will come in the end times, in Revelation 12, for example. And we'll conclude the study of these persecutions from the Syrian king Antiochus. That happened in 168 BC, and that to this day, the Jews still celebrate what God did 3 years later. It's their festival of Hanukkah. And when we get to verse 36 next time, we'll see the first prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 that has not yet been fulfilled. It's a prophecy that's still in the future, even for us. And we'll look at some of those characteristics of the king of the end times, the Antichrist, who was foreshadowed here by Antiochus IV. So I hope to see you there.